think we are actually live. Let's see if we are actually live, which I think we are. Play. Oh, all right. It is time delayed on my screen, but we appear to actually be making this happen here. Cool. All right. So, thank you guys all for joining us. I figured out how to launch this, or how to like preset the live stream this time. So we were able to actually set up, and there were like 200 of you guys who are waiting for it to start. Welcome. This is my dad, Duncan, also known as Hi Dad, apparently.
Yeah. Well, I'm not high at the moment, but...
Hopefully the audio is a little bit better this time. I still detest audio technical issues on this sort of thing. I think we've improved it. We'll find out pretty quickly, I suspect. But we have cocktails, we have some food, we have chopsticks, and you brought a fancy Chinese style robe. So, we are also like incredibly close to 1.5 million on the Kickstarter.
Amazing.
Is pretty awesome, isn't it?
Fantastic.
Yes, so that is of course thanks to all of you guys. Chopsticks for a spring roll. Right. So, we're going to dig into, I think, a cocktail to start. Jay Molnar, I fixed the issue that allowed Othaius to crash the live stream last time. Of course, now that I've said that, if he's watching, he's going to try it again. But I don't think it's going to work. So, we already talked about which drinks you were interested in trying. We came up with a couple examples so that everyone who's watching can try with us. But which one do you want to start with?
Oh.
We have one sheet of classic cocktails, and those came straight out of a 1930s Shanghai nightclub menu, DD's nightclub. And then I have a second page that I put together of cocktails from that same menu that I sort of tweaked to make them a little more suitable to what I think are current modern tastes. Because, let's be honest, 1930s cocktails, some of them were just not very good. I mean, cocktails today, you go look up any cocktail recipe book and there's a lot of garbage in there. So, we have the Shanghai Cocktail, which we have to use, obviously. In this book, the Shanghai Cocktail, we have to have that in there. But then we also have the Aviation, and we have the Maiden's Blush.
Well, do we need to save the Shanghai or start off with the classic old one?
I think we should start with an Aviation and save the Shanghai.
Okay.
I am being told that people are not necessarily seeing this on the channel. So hold that. Let me take a quick look here. Sorry guys, one moment.
It's never easy dealing with technology.
That is odd. It does not appear to be. Oh! I have to set it to public instead of unlisted, don't I? You guys are there watching because I posted the link on Kickstarter. Oops. All right. So we're going to restart this. Once I figure out how to actually make it live. And public. All right. Now, theoretically, people can see it on the channel who aren't the special folks who already got the notification through Kickstarter. So, let's make sure. All right, yes, I'm told we are now good to go. So,
Broadcasting to the world.
Yes, welcome to Forgotten Weapons. I'm Ian, of course. This is Duncan, my father, author of a book about 25 years ago
25 years ago.
on Arasakas, which are not Japanese, but they're geographically close to being, or not Chinese, but geographically close to being Chinese.
And yes, and used in lots of instances with the Chinese.
And in fact, actually, there were more than a few Chinese-made Arasakas outside of actual Japanese factory control. So these things showed up a lot during the Warlord era, in fact. But, yes, welcome to Forgotten Weapons, where I forgot to set the video to public. This is true. All right, so we have some food to snack on, courtesy of a local Chinese restaurant. Well, I mean, I gave them money and they gave me some food. So. And then we are going to try out a couple cocktails, and I figured a lot of you guys are probably psyched up about the cocktails, so we can dig right into one of those. And I think we're going to start with an aviation, which is, this is an interesting one in that it is a cocktail that a lot of, it was like the hipster cocktail. Could I please get my shaker and some ice? It was like the hipster cocktail. And very, like, if you walked into a bar and asked for an aviation, ooh, it meant you were a hipster cocktail snob, cool person. But a lot of people didn't really actually like it. Especially the way it was originally written, it's a really sour drink. So, the drink is gin, and we have I Swear to You, thank you, and the glass and the measuring thing. I swear to you, I did not deliberately pick French gin myself. I went into my local liquor store and said, I'm making cocktails, they're like classic style cocktails. What would you recommend for a gin that will stand up to, you know, vermouths and Camparis and that sort of stuff? And the guy went, I'd get that French gin. So, okay. So we're gonna go with 2 ounces of that. Could you hand me my set of tools there?
There's this.
Yep.
Glass.
All fumbly.
You need all of these.
Yep. And that. So, this is primarily a gin cocktail. It is 2 ounces of gin. This is 44%, so it's slightly higher proof than normal, but not a ton. And then we're going to add to that Contra. Let me just make sure. It's not Contra. Maraschino, which we have here. This is a funky cherry liqueur. Creme de violet, which is what largely gave it its name, because it gives the drink a real pale blue sky color.
I was wondering where the name came from.
Yep. And lemon juice. Now, the original recipe called for like 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice and a dash each of these. And it came out tasting like sour gin. Which is not, a lot of people drank it because they're like, it's the hipster crowd, but didn't actually really into it. All right, so we're gonna go with a 1/2 ounce of the maraschino. Luxardo is the best brand. It is unfortunately also the most expensive brand, but that straw wrapping is easily recognized and found. And a 1/4 ounce of creme de violet. This has a good floral sort of flavor, like you would expect, and gives the drink a really nice pale blue color. There's that. By the way, if this is quiet, too quiet, I apologize, and headphones will help it. I've done my best with the equipment here, but if you can, headphones would be a boon. Except for right now when it's going to be loud. So, okay. I personally really like the aviation in this form. I think it is not too sour. I personally really like gin cocktails. So we'll go ahead and split one of these. There you are.
Alrighty.
Cheers. Sláinte.
Cheers. Sláinte. That's very good.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The important thing was less lemon, more of the sweet ingredients to balance it.
I wonder if anybody's having one of these at home with us?
We will find out in a moment. Ian's dad looks like a wizard.
I was wondering if the extra strong gin relates to the aviation name, because somehow if you finish one of these, you're perhaps flying high.
I do like these with a Navy strength gin.
Navy strength?
Like 58%.
Yikes. That's really.
But I have to say, sorry guys, but the goal here was kind of not to get hammered, embarrassingly hammered on camera, live.
Right.
So, Chinese pistols. You looked through the book, because in fact, you helped me edit all of my books, having done some writing yourself, and he always finds a lot of embarrassing errors that I'm very happy that none of you guys see. But you had a chance to look through the whole manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I think it is incredibly fascinating from several different aspects. Because first off, it's about this batch of pistols that there is nothing written about, probably in any language, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the first time anybody has ever comprehensively looked at these and tried to classify them and figure out what they are and try to understand them. Even though there's not much documentation about them, you can intuit and logically figure out a lot just by looking at hundreds of these things, which
Right.
he did. He looked at hundreds of these pistols, and then patterns start to emerge. And I mean, the presentation is, as usual, fantastic.
That's largely thanks to James Rupley's photography, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
James and I spent many long days photographing a lot of pistols for this book. What's been really cool is since the book launched, and even since I started talking about it a little bit beforehand on places like Instagram, I've had a number of people email me with pictures of guns, like, hey, I have one of these weird Chinese pistols, check this out. And it's been really gratifying that every one of those that I've gotten has fit neatly into one of the type categories that I've specified in the book. And so in the book, there's one example where we have, actually it was kind of cool. In the original collection that I referenced for the book, we had this one really funky pistol. It's clip fed, so it locks open like a C96 and you load it with a stripper clip. But the magazine's in the grip, not out front. And the gun just looks totally like hand built. We honestly thought someone repaired this, like the grips were way too small and didn't cover all the internal bits. And there's weird, like there's hex bolts on the outside. But man, it's super cool. It's in the book. And then a couple months later, while I'm working on the draft of the book itself, another one shows up on Gunbroker, and I snagged it. And it is the exact same funkiness as that first one. It's got the same look like their replacement hacked up grips, hex bolt on the outside, obviously the exact same pattern. And they both have serial numbers, and I think, if I remember, one of them's like 2200 and the other's 7400. So did someone make like 10,000 of these pistols? I can't imagine that they did, but what I initially thought was a one-off, turns out, no, like here's number 2, and I guarantee you there are more. And we had the same thing happen just recently with a guy who sent me a picture of a pistol with this, had a marking on it. It was a diamond with an RN. And the N, I think the N was backwards inside the diamond. And we already have, it's way too late to include that pistol in the book, but we have one in the book that's the same basic pattern and has that exact same RN diamond mark.
Wow.
And so, like, once you see a lot of these guns, like you said, patterns start to emerge, and you can actually start to recognize trends in a way that you could never do looking at one or even looking at a dozen of them, but 300 at a time. And anyway, where I was going with this is it's been really gratifying that so far nobody sent me one that doesn't fit into the book.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I haven't actually missed anything, any substantial group.
Well, and so one of the really valuable aspects of this book, besides, the fabulous photography and all the information that you were able to determine is to create this sort of classification scheme for something that there was no such thing before, so that when you're out wandering around at the gun show and you find one of these unusual pistols, you can put it in a box in your mind.
Exactly.
And if you want to collect them, you have a reference for, so I want a collection of these things, but there's 4 main types or something?
7.
7 main types, okay. So maybe I want all 7, maybe I like some of them, but I know kind of what to look for.
And it also gives people a collector terminology to use.
Right.
Because right now you look at a Chinese mystery pistol and you're like, I don't know, it's one of them weird Chinese pistols, where the book will allow people to say, oh, it's a horn grip type.
Right.
Or it's an open slide FN type or an open slide Mauser type. Based on specific objective mechanical and decorative criteria.
Right.
You should hand me some food.
Oh, we have food.
We have some food here.
What was I thinking?
You were distracted by interesting guns, which
I know.
I understand, but happens to me that maybe this is where it comes from. Right?
Yes. I am easily distracted, especially by interesting and fun things.
Go ahead, I'll be right there.
I didn't realize that the world was going to watch me try and use chopsticks appropriately and not
I totally didn't plan that.
and not drop food in my lap.
Something will catch it.
Yeah, that'll be even more attractive.
That food looks delicious. Yes, it is. So you have dongbei fried pork, and I have what is a very, well, I don't know what the Chinese name would be. It is cumin lamb with a lot of cumin, and it's really good. And we have yushang eggplant, which is off screen because there's not room for it on the table right now.
This is very good.
Thank you, Chef Wang. Actually, their name in Tucson. Really an extensive menu and really good stuff. KJ Ack is saying it'd be really cool if the book spurs more information to come out that like makes it feasible or necessary to publish a second edition. That's part of the idea. Like, there's no documentation on these things. There are a few of them that are factory made, and we know they're factory made because they're actually marked with the factory and a date generally. And so those we know something about, and we can trace. You know, they have legit serial numbers that are actually like in series, as the name suggests. But most of them are artisanal scale production, a few here, a few there. Who knows what the serial numbers actually mean, if anything? Like when you get to the copies of the FN 1900s, I think it was about 40% of them in the book have essentially the same serial number. Which, by the way, I've been unable to determine the significance of that specific number. We talked to Anthony Vanderlinden, who is an awesome FN collector, and he actually helped out digging through some of FN's original records on where did the original FN 1900s with that serial number go. and it came up inconclusive, like it was a Belgian military order. So maybe it somehow ended up in China, maybe it didn't, no idea.
So I remember, and one of the things you, you talk about in the book, I think, regarding this issue of why do so many of these certain kinds of guns in particular have the same serial number, is maybe one or maybe even more than one of these, you know, artisanal craftsmen are working from a single original as a model.
Yeah.
And they're making it as authentic as they can with their understanding of what that requires and entails. And there's a number on it, and lucky for them, they have a set of, you know, Arabic style numeral stamps, and they figure out which ones it is, and they duplicate it correctly, and they keep using that same number because that number has some significance. It's very hard to know.
What's funny is that number is predominantly on FN 1900 copies. It shows up every once in a while on other styles of pistol, some of the domestic Chinese designs, but like you don't see it on C96 Mauser copies. It's specifically FN 1900s, almost exclusively. So there's something, and I don't know what the thing is, but there's something there.
Yeah, maybe they had one that had that serial number on it, or that's part of a serial number of an original one that they're using as a model.
Yeah.
Or they saw a similar gun that had that number on it somewhere and assumed that that had some significance.
That's all I can imagine, yeah.
Was there any evidence that the ones with the same numbers could have been made by the same craftsman or the same group of craftsmen working together, or is that impossible to tell?
It's impossible to say for sure, but I can tell you it crosses all styles. It'd be one thing if there was some mechanical characteristic or decorative characteristic that those guns had in common, but there isn't, at least not that I was able to discern. It's a little bit of everything. Now here's a question that has actually come up a lot that you can answer really well from Arasakas. A lot of people ask, why do these Asian guns, and this would be Korean, Chinese, Japanese, why do they all have Western serial numbers? Why don't they use, like, the markings on the gun are in kanji, why aren't the serial numbers?
That's a very good question. I wonder if I do have an answer for that.
Do you?
I don't know that I know specifically, unless it's, you know, a result of European influence when the Japanese in that case were, you know, setting up factories and following, you know, modern manufacturing procedures and also the ability to track guns. And I'm not sure I know why they necessarily selected Western style Arabic numerals.
But the sun has surpassed the horizon.
But does the sun have the answer? You probably do have the answer.
I do have the answer. I was trying to softball you the question.
All right, enlighten me,
The
my
answer
son.
is kanji suck for large numbers. If you look at like the Type 30, on the Type 30 Arasaka, it's marked 310 type. Because the way the numbers are formulated, if you want to say 30, that's 3 tens.
Right.
Which is fine for relatively small numbers and daily counting of how many cows do I have, you know, daily objects. But when you get to serial number 857,326, writing that out in that form of numbering is just a complete mess. And it's not conducive to mechanized, you know, iterative stamping dies. And Western numerals are just a whole lot better for that.
And so is there a specific reason why? Is it like a language usage reason that they can't use the characters for the digits 0 through 9 and just put them in sequence?
That I don't know. You'd think they could have, like with the Arasakas, the series symbols are that Iroku poem,
Right.
which are essentially equivalent to, say, the French series letter prefixes or German prefixes.
Right. Yeah, because they come in a specific sequence.
Yeah, but they didn't. I would think they could have. but they chose to use Western digits instead.
Maybe it's part of, trying to adopt particular Western ways as a way of being perceived as a modern country.
That may well be. I know the Chinese arsenals in particular, almost all the big ones were set up with European or American technical assistance.
Right.
There were a lot of German technicians that came over to help set up arsenals. Frankly, a lot of the Chinese arsenal machinery came from companies like Pratt & Whitney, who were selling machine tools. And so they probably had Western engineers who were looking at it and be like, okay, you want to mark the model designation in Chinese characters, great, that's cool, but we are not going to try to figure out how to get a progressive stamping, an iterative stamping die for serial numbers in these characters. We're going to use our numbers because they work really well for this.
Yeah.
And you see that, like even on the Chinese pistols, the dates, well, the dates are in Chinese characters because the date's not that hard and it doesn't change very often. And the model designations and the factory names are generally in Chinese.
So I don't recall now from reading it, are the dates that are in Chinese characters a Western style date or a Chinese calendar date?
They are, I believe, all Chinese dates. So they're dates based on 1911, which is when the Chinese Revolution that finally overthrew the Qing dynasty. And so year 0 is 1911. Year 1 is 1912. Year 10 is 1921. Oh! Congratulations. We have hit $1.5 million on the Kickstarter.
Woohoo!
That is awesome.
That is really fantastic.
Yes, I did not think it would go that high.
Yeah.
I legit didn't think it would go that high.
Good job, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Where was I?
Dates.
Oh, yes. So the dates, I'm trying to think if there are any that are definitely Western dates, and I don't think there are. There are a handful of guns, maybe I want to say about a dozen, that have World War II dates on them.
Right.
But it's really hard to tell if that's a date or a serial number or a copy of a date that that isn't consciously done because it is that date. Like, is it a copy of a date for the same reason we have the serial number copied on a lot of these guns? Or is it actually a date?
Right.
And there are a couple in the 1920s, but almost all of the examples of those are 1940 through 45.
Mm-hmm.
So why those dates, if they are dates, I don't know.
Yeah.
There are a couple that are almost dates, but not quite, like 19443.
Right. So an interesting correlation in Japan, with the Arasakas and Nambus and the pistols and the machine guns, is the way they did type or model designations using Japanese characters for the numbers, like you were talking about, like the type 30 or the type 38, whatever, done with Japanese characters on the receiver, top of the receiver over the chamber, and the way that pistols and machine guns were dated as to manufacture date using Arabic characters, but using the traditional Japanese calendar system.
That's right, that's like 14.6.
Right. So you have to know how to, if you want to know when your Japanese firearm that has a date was made, you have to understand and know how to convert from one of a couple different Japanese systems, because sometimes it's the overall Japanese system that starts around 600 BC and they use the last couple digits, or it could be the year, the reign year of the particular emperor, starting with the first year of his reign.
So I remember, in fact, the Type 99, that's the year 2599.
Yes.
And then that's why you've got like the Type 2 that comes right after it. That's the year 2602.
Right, so the thing that's really convenient about that is the year 2600 Japanese calendar is the same as the Western year 1940, which at least makes the math doable for all of us, people like me who
Easy to
like
remember.
math, and you can remember.
But then, like the type 30, 35, 38 are based on, what was the dynasty? Showa?
No, Taisho, well, Taisho, well, some are Meiji, Taisho, and then Showa.
Okay.
The three emperors during the modern period of Japan.
Okay.
And so you have to know when that particular emperor, started his reign and calculate forward from that. And
So the type 30 is actually 1897.
yeah,
The type 38 is 1905.
right.
And the Chinese type 17 is 1928.
Right.
Because it's 17 plus 1911. The Chinese ones are actually pretty easy because 11 is an easy number to add to just about anything.
Yeah.
The eggplant. Try some.
More yummy food.
Henry Chan specifically recommended this dish.
Mm.
This is going to be entertaining with chopsticks, isn't it?
Yes.
I'll take care of it.
He did it.
All right, let's see. Before we whip up another cocktail, let's see if we have any important comments that we need to answer. Someone asked why there's no scotch. It's because we have a whole bunch of really cool Shanghai, golden age of Shanghai, equivalent to like Prohibition era US cocktails that I was really excited when I realized that we could do this for cocktails. Because I was trying to figure out what on earth is the cocktail culture of a Chinese warlord or army. Because the answer is there ain't none. It's like moonshine and various sorts of iffy beer.
Mhm.
You know, this was a peasant army. They weren't sitting around sipping ooh la la cocktails. And when I realized Shanghai was in its total golden era right in the middle of this utter chaos, bing, we can get some really cool cocktails out of that. Yes, they had Budweiser, Alex. That's exactly it. But probably with some yeast still floating in the bottom. People appreciate you from Tales of the Gun, by the way.
Really? People are still watching that, huh?
Well, they remember it at least.
Yeah.
That was the golden age of the History Channel, before it was all ancient aliens and ice road truckers.
Yeah, and that was a fun show to be able to be part of. They did a good job.
And Martin he apparently can handle all of these Oriental dating systems, and the one that really bugs him is how the U.S. does month, then day, then year.
Yes, it's very confusing.
All right, so people are going to laugh at you if you order a drink called the Maiden's Blush, right? Probably.
Maybe.
But it's actually a really good drink. And if you want to just play up the stereotype, this is a great drink to try out on your female companion who's like, ew, gin, I don't like gin. Gin's gross. This is a gin-based cocktail that is really good. So, if you would, we may need to rinse that out. Is that still full of aviation,
It's got some stuff in
melty
it, yes.
aviation stuff? Cool. All right, so we'll get that in a moment. So this is an ounce of gin, an ounce of lemon juice, which is a lot of lemon juice
Yeah.
to go into a cocktail. But then it gets balanced out by 3/4 of an ounce of Cointreau. Cointreau, thank you. Which is an orange, a high proof, this is 80 proof, orange liqueur.
Wow.
And 3/4 of an ounce of grenadine. Grenadine requires a bit of introduction because I think most people are used to like Rose's nuclear red grenadine. No, I think we'll stick with these if Dan wants to actually finish his first
Oh.
drink.
Oh, this may not go
You,
well.
you can dump it too, but or I can. You want me to drink it?
No,
Okay.
actually, it's really good.
So grenadine is not Rose's grenadine that you find in the grocery store is high fructose corn syrup, and red number 5. Actual grenadine is pomegranate syrup. There are a bunch of places, well, there are at least a number of places out there that make actual real pomegranate syrup grenadine, and it is totally different. And if you're interested in proper cocktails, strongly recommend it. This came from Lieber. Didn't pay me or anything. They have a really good selection of cocktail syrups. So
He gave me a sip of this earlier, and it's really good.
I think
It would be just fine by itself.
well,
I mean,
very sweet. It's
yeah,
like, it is syrup.
yeah. So
Touche. Okay. Let's see.
depends on the context.
There should be an ingredients list on here somewhere, but no, I'm not finding it. At any rate, I think a lot of people have never tasted a pomegranate or what pomegranate syrup tastes like, but it's so.
That's going to make a really good cocktail, I'm sure.
And that grenadine is what gives the cocktail its name, because it comes out as this incredibly pink, deep pink, which you'll see in a moment. We got a little bit of juice left in this lemon. Need another lemon? I do. Thank you.
I'm the lovely assistant.
There we go. Exactly an ounce. And 1 ounce of gin. I would say, I will argue, and anyone is welcome to fight me over this, any cocktail made with vodka should either not be drunk or should be made with gin instead.
I much prefer gin to
Yeah.
vodka.
Oh.
Gin has some interesting flavor.
Exactly. Vodka is just there to make non-alcoholic things alcoholic,
Yeah.
which is fine, but poor and not classy. Thank you. And yes, I'm doing the totally lowbrow thing of just reusing the glass without rinsing it.
Pretty soon it won't matter.
Just put those on the tray. Thank you. And that pretty well says girly Maiden's blush, totally pink drink, right?
I'm not going to say girly
Okay.
on camera, but it looks delicious.
It really is delicious, but it is the thing some people would be embarrassed to see holding at a bar.
Well,
But it is also a properly balanced cocktail. So it looks like candy, doesn't taste like candy, but it's got a really good pomegranate flavor. It's got a citrusy lemon flavor without being puckery. You've got the base underlying complexity of the gin, juniper and citrus peel and all of the other herbal and spice notes in a proper strong gin. And then honestly to me the least present ingredient is the Cointreau. There is some orange in there, but there's not a ton of it. But it does, this is a strong cocktail. There's 2 ounces of full proof spirits in this, because the Cointreau is as strong as your regular spirits. That's an 80 proof liqueur.
Yikes. So you all should be listening to him carefully, because I can tell you he has a lot of experience in bars.
I did work in a bar for several
But in a
years.
good way, yeah. He was on the proper side of the counter of the bar.
No, not be judgy.
Well, in terms of experience gained.
Grenadine and ginger ale is my favorite. That, I believe, is a Shirley Temple.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what? Man, if you took real grenadine and it'd be interesting to try it with ginger beer. like a really spicy ginger beer.
Yeah.
That could be a fantastic adult sober cocktail. If you don't drink, if you're the designated driver, man, you could.
That's a great idea.
I can't come up with one off the top of my head, but you could probably come up with some really good name for that. That's a play on whatever Shirley Temple did as an actress when she was fully grown instead of a child.
I think she became an American ambassador
Really?
when she was fully grown up, yeah.
To where?
I can't remember. Somebody will know. Whoever remembers where Shirley Temple was the ambassador to for the United States, post it. Or if I'm totally off base, tell me I don't know what I'm talking about.
Uh-oh. I have offended the entire nation of Poland because of the vodka thing. Sorry.
Oops.
Now, there's some Polish vodka that's not flavorless. My problem with vodka is vodka that aspires to be industrial ethanol with no flavor whatsoever. It's like homeopathic booze. Like, the better distilled, we distill it 87 times, so there's one molecule of flavor left in it, and it's perfect. No, there's Polish, like lemongrass vodka. I can't remember the name in Polish, but there's something like that. I'll keep an open mind to that. I did a taste test once with a very pro vodka friend of mine who insisted that there was good vodka and there was crap vodka. And I gave him, we did a blind taste test and he completely failed it. Couldn't tell. I mean, I think our bad was Smirnoff, which isn't bad, it's just standard. It's like, Ghana, Czechoslovakia. Have I also insulted Ghana and Czechoslovakia? Oh. Shirley Temple. No. Shirley Temple was an ambassador to Ghana and Czechoslovakia. Interesting.
Okay.
9th ambassador to Ghana. Yes, here it is. And the 27th ambassador to Czechoslovakia.
Awesome.
Well done. All right.
At least I knew part of it.
Zubroczka, or Zubrowka. Zubrojka. That's the Polish lemongrass vodka.
Oh.
By the way, these comments are scrolling pretty darn fast here, so I'm missing most of them. And they're also delayed, like 20 seconds. Oh, I couldn't have insulted Czechoslovakia because it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Instead, I've insulted both the Czechia and Slovenia, or Slovakia.
Yeah.
And now I've insulted Slovenia. We'd better change subjects real fast here.
We better start having Shirley Temples is probably what needs to happen.
Possibly.
An alternate, a real one and a Shirley Temple and then a real one.
I like that Citadel gin. It's
is.
good stuff. It stands up in these cocktails where, we've got a heavy orange liqueur, we've got a thick sweet syrup in there, and you can still taste the gin, and it gives a good foundation to the drink.
I wonder how that would work in a traditional gin and vermouth.
I don't know. Probably pretty darn well. I would certainly be willing to try it, although maybe not at this exact moment.
No. We have plenty left to try. Oh.
I'm curious where we are on the Kickstarter now. We are at, drum roll please, 1506. Nice. It's still closing.
Awesome.
Holy cow. It's awesome.
I know. You guys out there in the world are fantastic.
All right, someone wants Sky Harbor stories, because apparently they've been around long enough that they heard me say once that I was a bartender at the Sky Harbor Airport.
Oh, yes.
At the Chili's at the Sky Harbor Airport. Rest in peace, it no longer exists. They've knocked it down and replaced it with something else equally useless, I suspect.
Oops, now you just insulted Chili's.
I'm okay with that. that place gave me restaurant PTSD. I don't think I have any good stories from it that I can think of.
So I flew through that airport at least a few times when Ian was actually working, and I went to the Chili's. And
Yeah, that's right.
he was a highly efficient bartender. He could whip up drinks fast, well, and I suspect was tipped accordingly for his efficiency.
So there were good things about working in as terrible a location as an airport bar. We closed early. It was an airport, so I'm not a late night owl person. I'm kind of like getting up early in the morning, and that bar closed at 10 p.m. and we were out of there by 11 or 11:30. Never really had to deal with drunk drivers because you're at the airport. You're not driving home. There was, we still had to be aware of people, of course, but did not have it as it was a very rare problem instead of a fairly typical thing that we had to watch for. The tips were good because all of the drinks were painfully overpriced because it's in an airport, so everything was painfully overpriced.
And people are really grateful to get a drink when they're traveling and things are really
Oh, that's right. You're right. That's the story.
Oh,
I grew all my facial hair because of that job.
really?
Yes, because I started working there when I was 23. And I started getting incessant, obnoxious comments about, are you even old enough to serve alcohol?
That's funny.
And it was really obnoxious. And so I grew in a mustache and a beard. And at the time, the beard didn't want to, there was like a big open patch right in here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I went with this. Is because it looked really dumb if I tried to grow in a full beard. Which has changed now, actually.
Yeah.
Someday will be interesting.
So that's a genetic thing too. Because as late as my early 40s, I decided to try and grow a beard, and it was a dismal failure.
Well, it's not now.
I know. Well, something about aging. Finally, my face caught up with the rest of me.
But as soon as this came in, comments completely stopped. Thankfully, that was really good. But yeah, like we never had bums off the street because we're in an airport. We were outside of security, which at that point was nice. We were the only place in that terminal that served alcohol outside of security. So everybody who had a long layover and smoked would leave security so they could go outside to have a cigarette, and then they'd come in and have a drink, and then a cigarette, and then a drink, back and forth until their flight. And that was all captive to us at the fantastic highbrow Chili's. So I did try to do proper, this sort of real cocktail there, which didn't work very well because frankly, first off, most of the vast majority of the clientele was not interested. They wanted the Chili's nuclear colored slushy margaritas. Okay, fine, whatever, there's 6 of them. I've got them all thoroughly memorized, not anymore, but okay. But it was
that's probably knowledge well lost.
yes, it is. But it was always a happy occasion when someone came in who was actually interested in that sort of thing, except that we did not have fresh citrus juice because none of the Chili's margaritas use it. They use bagged sweet and sour mix, which is yellow number 2 and high fructose corn syrup. So every once in a while, when I got someone who wanted, in particular, a real margarita, which is, by the way, basically call it 2 ounces or 1.5 ounces of tequila, 3/4 ounce Cointreau, 1/2 ounce lime juice. Adjust the ratios to how you like sweet versus sour. I didn't have lime juice, but I had lime wedges. We would cut limes into wedges to put on all the drinks. And so I'd squeeze like 18 lime wedges to get 1/2 ounce of lime juice. And that was the only way to actually do it.
Good job circumventing the Chili's rules.
I'm just trying to make the customer happy.
Oh yeah.
No, I was doing so well.
Eating slippery onions with chopsticks is a skill.
I got it. Did I ever have anyone dine and dash? I don't remember any. I'm sure we must have had 1 or 2, but it's an airport. Where are you going to go? We did have one guy who tried to pay me with a counterfeit $100 bill. I remember this very well. It was actually a Super Bowl Sunday. And the whole place was absolutely packed. Like literally standing capacity completely full, everyone watching the TV at the end of the game. And some guy had some drinks and he paid me with 100. And first off, we had those stupid markers to detect counterfeit bills. They're completely worthless. Because according to that marker, this was a real bill. Because what it actually was a $5 bill that someone had somehow bleached and reprinted as 100. So it was real money paper, and it had the little security strip in it. But the thing that I had gotten in the habit of doing with large denomination bills was looking at the watermark.
Oh.
And this was a $100 bill with a picture of Abe Lincoln on it. And I'm like, that ain't right. And so we stalled the guy and we called security. And the cops showed up in about a minute, because it's an airport, it's full of cops, and they've got nothing else to do. And it turned out the guy had like 8 of them. And as far as I could tell at the time, I basically just handed that off to the cops, and I had 1,000 other people to deal with. But it sounded like he won a Super Bowl bet, and that's the money that he won, and he didn't know it was counterfeit.
Oh.
It sounds like someone lost a bet and paid off in fake money. It was unfortunate, but that's the only like illegal incident thing that I can remember.
Wow.
Do we have another incoming question? Someone is asking for the pup. The pup is actually right there, and we'll bring her on at some point here, but not while we still have pork and lamb at muzzle height here.
Yeah, that wouldn't be nice. Uh-oh.
So,
Uh-oh.
no, she heard her name, I think, or intuited her name, or smelled the pork. Anyway, we will have her on, but not quite yet. Let's see, what else do we have going on? Vietnamese gun book when? I don't see it coming. That would have to be, honestly, I would need a source of real information, significant information. Gentleman remembers when I did a video on a Vietnamese, basically field-made 1911, and he's right. There are guns like these Chinese pistols that were made other places. The two big ones being tribal Pakistan, what we typically refer to as Khyber Pass, which isn't really the correct name, but Pakistani guns and guns that were made in Vietnam in small shops. And that's an interesting question in that we had to do some work to make sure that the guns that are in the pistols of the Warlords book are actually Chinese. And there are a couple guns that we were looking at and discarded as pretty sure that one's not Chinese. So this collection that the book is based on was built over a couple of decades, a very long time. And the guy who put it together is very knowledgeable on the subject, but there were a couple of guns in there. In fact, there were a couple that he told us straight up. Like, yes, I bought this one, I wasn't sure at the time, and it sure looks like all the others. The best example is there's a Pakistani Colt 1900 sight safety, like the really early Colt automatic pistol, that you could pass off as a Chinese warlord or a pistol, but in fact it was not, and so that got ditched out of the book. So the problem is, until I find someone who has a really good comprehensive collection of Vietnamese field manufactured guns, there's not a book to do on it.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody's actively collecting that consciously.
Probably, but there's someone.
Because there must be a lot of them around.
It would be more likely to do a book on like Vietnamese firearms from, like the 20th century, but like the U.S. Vietnam War, the Vietnamese versus the Japanese, the Vietnamese versus the French. Yeah. And there's a lot of interesting stuff there. They made some of their own adapted guns. You've got conversions of a bunch of things to 7.62 Tokarev. Like there are 7.62 Tokarev caliber 1911 conversions out there. There are MAC 49s in 7.62 Tokarev. That would be an interesting one, but again, it'd be dependent on finding a good, complete collection of that stuff. Well, let's see, what else do we have? Do I happen to know when a Russian Avtomat book will come out? We are hoping for to launch that book in a year. So basically this time next year we hope to be doing that one. We had initially been thinking it might be possible to do it earlier. We've run into a few, I don't want to say, well, we've run into a few issues, but the issues are just a time issue. There's stuff that we have to fix to do that book properly. So it'll come. In fact, those issues actually make the book more likely to happen. Like it's moved farther along and we've run into this where we're like, okay, we have to fix that. So let's take care of that. That'll take some time, but we're hoping next spring. Hello, Henry. Apparently Henry Chan has joined the live stream. I don't see him right here, but welcome, Henry. Henry has been a huge help in this whole process. He was my go-to guy for translating Chinese characters on guns. And it's been really cool discussing a bunch of this stuff with him. So,
And on my
yes, and
clothing here.
on your Chinese style robe, you sent me a picture of that, and I'm like, that's really cool. And then I went, I wonder what it says.
Very
Before
smart
we
guy.
stream this live on the internet, I better find out what that says. And it is apparently, well, you remember? You're gonna...
It's like characters that that are or represent the names of what 3 culturally significant wise characters from, is it from Chinese history or mythology?
I think more mythology.
I don't recall.
It's
Yeah.
symbolic virtues of wealth or
Yeah.
prosperity and health, and so it's cool. It's not something that I'm gonna really regret live streaming on the internet.
Right.
Which, if you haven't seen it, we did a really cool video with Henry. Henry and I did a really cool video talking about Chinese translations, because it's a really difficult written language to translate. There's so much subjective implication in a lot of Chinese characters that, you know, when we talk about a Romance language, going from French to German to English to Spanish is basically just a literal translation, plus accounting for, you know, things being in different order.
Right.
But with Chinese, there's so much more nuance and implication that translation can be really hard. So we don't need to, I mean, that could be the entire next hour's discussion. But if you haven't seen it, check out that video that Henry and I did, talking about how that works and how it's different in different cultural areas of China.
Right.
Hong Kong versus Taiwan versus Singapore versus mainland China. And then within the mainland, north, south, huge cultural differences.
Well, and aren't there, I mean, don't they use the same set of thousands of characters to write all the different dialects of China?
Yes.
Chinese?
So that's the other thing that makes it complicated is there are at least 4 major spoken languages that all use the same writing. So they can all read the same thing, but if they speak it, these can be mutually not understandable. And then there are a lot of sub-dialects that can also be indistinguishable to each other.
Well, and the same Chinese characters, you know, the Japanese call them kanji.
Right.
So they use the same set of thousands of characters to write their language.
Right, which is not comprehensible to someone who speaks Mandarin or Cantonese.
I mean, that's a really interesting, well, I guess it's the same as using the same letters to write different European languages or English and so forth, but I'm impressed that there are whole cultures where people can learn literally thousands of characters to write a language.
1.51 million. It's just,
Man, it is kind of unbelievable.
it's pretty awesome is what it is. And a ton of that, by the way, is going to Dolph Goldsmith. Well, not a ton of it, but a substantial portion of it. Dolph is, for those of you who don't know who Dolph Goldsmith is, he is currently about 1,000 years old. He is he is a nice man, a brilliant, knowledgeable guy, and really just a pillar of the machine gun community in the United States, and internationally, to be honest, and has a particular interest in Chinese history as well. He spent a long time in Hong Kong. To put him in perspective, he's written 7 books for collector, or 6 books for collector grade, and 1 follow-up after collector grade ended. His first book on the Browning machine gun has, of course, on the inside cover, has a picture of the author and a little about the author section. The picture is Dolph holding a Browning 1917 water-cooled machine gun at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in 1949 in a training class. And so, yeah, he's like 1,000 years old. Fantastic guy. Speaks Mandarin.
Wow.
And back in the 90s, he got an opportunity to look at this huge batch of imported Chinese Mausers, which is actually Don Bell, Omega Weapons Systems, right down here in Tucson, who imported all those things and let Dolph just paw through literally pallets and pallets of rifles. And what he did is put together serial number tables and date tables to establish a baseline understanding of production of 4 different major Warlord era Mauser and Mauser-like rifles.
How cool.
And he published this as about a 50-page monograph called Arming the Dragon. And the original thing, I don't even have a copy. A friend of mine has a copy, and I scanned his so that I had access to the data. It was basic, it looked pretty much typewritten and mimeographed, paper cover, and spiral bound. And they can't have printed more than like 100 copies. Never did a second printing, because it was basically pre-internet and an incredibly niche topic. Who cares about what was essentially considered garbage? And frankly, most of these rifles that came in from China were in really poor condition because they'd been used and abused for 80 years. You know, these are guns that were made as early as 1900. Most of the major arsenals in China were established in the late 1800s under the Qing dynasty as an effort to modernize their military force. Anyway, Dolph writes this book, and it's incredibly scarce, but it's a really good source of information on these guns. And so when we're getting into the project here with Pistols of the Warlords, I got the idea that, hey, like, we can reprint that. We're a company that prints books. That's a book. And so I wrote Dolph, and Dolph doesn't really do email. Like, you physically write a letter to Dolph, and that's how I got a hold of him. And I asked him, like, hey, would you allow us to reprint this monograph you did 25 years ago? And he pretty much went, okay. Like, you know, the original photos are long gone, they're lost. I don't think he's paid much attention to this thing in decades. It's an old project, and here's some kid who wants to reprint it. Like, okay, whatever, have fun. He's 1,000 years old, he doesn't really care about it anymore. But you guys have purchased a little over 3,000 copies of it now, which has got to be more than 10 times what was originally printed. And we sent Dolph a formal contract for him to give us the rights to reprint it. It was important to have all this formally on paper. And in there it says we're giving him a royalty. I don't know if he actually paid much attention or if he just like went, the contract, signed it. But we're going to be giving Dolph a substantial royalty check for 3,000 copies of his book. And that's really cool.
That's awesome, yeah.
Yeah.
What a wonderful surprise. A man like that.
I think so, yeah.
So I have a question. Were those rifles that he was examining and wrote this little booklet about, are those the Chinese rifles that also have some of the unusual marking and characteristics like the pistols of the Warlords that you were examining? Or is that a different Chinese rifle? Because I don't really know Chinese rifles that well.
So the answer is no, but also yes.
Okay.
So to some extent, everything was copied in China, which is to say manufactured in small scale by small shops. There are a substantial number of major arsenals in China, Hanyang, for example, Taiyuan, that were up to basically European contemporary standards of production and quality. And the warlord armies in China were massive. We're talking about millions of men. You know, in individual warlord's army, the big ones were hundreds of thousands of men.
Wow.
Like, the scale of this, you really have to think about, because it's hard to picture. You know, you think of like a national civil war, and it's relatively small numbers usually, but China is a huge country, and they had these huge armies, and the warlords were ordering, acquiring, purchasing, manufacturing huge numbers of rifles, and those rifles, the only way you could make that many was on a modern production line, assembly line tooling, and so the big arsenals made European quality rifles basically that had European style markings, which is to say they're all parts interchangeable, the serial numbers are sequential, and that's what Arming the Dragon is full of, is what was this, it turns out, like one of the arsenals, for example, was using a 10,000 gun increments, so a 4-digit serial number with a letter prefix. And then they'd increment the letter and do another 9999 of them, and then increment the letter. And if you get enough of these things together, you can set up a table of here are the dates and here are the serial number groups that they were doing that year. Well, there are going to be small arsenals, small workshops, repair shops, with these, warlords went everything from these huge armies down to a guy who ran a village. And maybe he's got this little militia of 100 men or something, and he needs a couple guns. Well, there's a little shop with a machinist, some sort of combination of machinist and blacksmith, who can hammer out a couple of guns. And that's what's available. And so that's where you'll get some of the pistols that are in this book. Like we have one in this book that is clearly intended to look like a C96 Mauser, but it's a single shot muzzle loading percussion cap gun.
Oh, I remember that one. That's like, pretty wild.
That came out of, I can picture that coming off of a blacksmith's shop, where the shop is a big 2-wheeled cart being pulled around by an ox. And one dude with a hammer. Like that's how that kind of pistol gets made.
And that's a pretty amazing accomplishment. For somebody like that.
A lot of people will ridicule that, but I tell you what, you go make that in your garage.
Right. Yeah.
But so that's where you get the rifle production that is equivalent to a lot of the pistols. It's a little small scale shop, and the guy doesn't have any jigs or fixtures, but he's got one of the real rifles, whether it's a European one or a Chinese production one, and he says, I need 10 of those. And so the markings on that are going to be nonsense, because the guy doesn't read English. It would be the equivalent of telling me to stamp arsenal markings in Chinese. I'm probably going to put one of the characters upside down, because I don't read it and I can't tell the difference. And it'll look to a Chinese person like I'm an idiot for making that thing. But yeah, there are versions of all of these, of the rifles, that are like this as well.
Yeah, because I had a friend once who collected those because he thought they were interesting.
Oh, cool.
And did a display once at a nice gun show, probably 20 years ago. And I looked at it, and and they, from a distance, they all look like standard German Mausers. And then you get up close, and there's, just like these pistols that Ian wrote about in his book, weird features. And the most interesting thing is the sort of garbled markings when they're putting a marking in a place where it belongs with English or German style characters, but it doesn't actually say anything in those languages.
Right.
And I think that's a really fascinating concept, that there's a particular kind of understanding of the world, that there are things that are meaningful even if you don't understand them. From a Western standpoint, where we have to analyze and we have a very mechanical, physical view of everything in the world, and then when you're actually doing mechanics or mechanical things, you're going to make sure it works the way it's supposed to work. But if you're an artisanal blacksmith in China and you've never been exposed to Western weaponry, and somebody gives you this European pistol and says, here, make one of these, you don't have any context for what's important and what's not important about it. So you do the absolute best you can and make it so that it appears to have all the pertinent features. And if some of those are markings, Eastern cultures, I think, put a little more emphasis on symbolic meaning of things because they have a different worldview. And if you don't have, training in engineering and physics and all this other stuff that goes into designing Western style guns the way Westerners do, you do the best you can.
Yeah.
And, I think it's pretty clear that all of these would fire a cartridge.
They'll definitely fire one.
Yeah.
Even the ones that look dangerous, like we've got pictures of one in the book where the slide is bent up clearly from impacting the frame.
Yeah.
So someone shot it more than once.
But I think that's a really interesting reflection of the differences between Eastern and Western cultures, and neither one is better than the other, they're just different. And one's trying to adapt to another in this instance, and they're doing the absolute best they can.
I am being told, and this is important, we are at just under 1 hour. So the Kickstarter will end at 9 p.m. my local time, about 55 minutes. We have no control over the ending. Like that's set, it will end. When it ends, that is it for purple cover Warlord style books, which I think is, like, I'm really happy with how popular that was. I knew it would be a fun thing to do. I did not expect it to be the significant majority of our sales, as it has been. But that is a Kickstarter exclusive option, and it will not appear on the Headstamp website. If we reprint the book, like if we sell out and do a second printing, it will not have that purple cover. That is 54 minutes and counting if you want one to get one. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna buy this book, that's the copy to get when you've got the chance, because it's just really cool.
Yeah, if you're on the live stream here watching, you understand why that's a fun thing. When we did it, like, I didn't want that version of the book to go into, like, the Cody Firearms Museum official reference library. I wanted them to have a book that looks academic and proper. But I thought it was too fun of an idea to not do. So, incoming telegram. Okay, cool. Apparently a bunch of you guys weren't aware of Dolph's book there, or hadn't thought about it, and have added it on, which is awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's one of those books that ought to be reprinted. It's great information, and it was such a rare book to find. And frankly, nobody knew about it in the first place. That's how rare it was. We get a lot of requests to reprint books for Headstamp, and almost all the time it's impossible. Because in order to reprint someone's book, we have to get permission from the author. Like, the author has a copyright on their work, and thanks to the Disney company, essentially, that copyright is 95 years after the date of death of the author. So if the author is dead, their estate still owns that copyright. It is enforceable, and you then have to go find whoever in their family inherited it, which often nobody knows. But if you go and reprint the book without their permission, and especially if it does well, someone will find out and sue you, and then it's just a complete nightmare. And there are a lot of authors out there who just frankly aren't interested in reprinting a book. If they wrote it 20 years ago and it's now sold out, oftentimes those guys have moved on to other interests, and
It's a lot of work.
yeah. Do we have any plans to revisit, I'm gonna try his name, Bin Shi, and update my interview with him on Chinese rifles? I would like to. It'd be fun. So there is one book out there, really, that actually talks about these pistols. And it is Chinese, I'm trying to remember the exact title, like Chinese Small Arms of the Second Sino-Japanese War by Bin Shi. And it's black and white, and it covers all of the small arms that the Chinese army was using, but predominantly we're talking 1931 to 1945. And he's got maybe 10 pages on pistols. And to be frank, I'll tell this little story anyway. At the very beginning of this project, I wrote to Bin, because I did an interview with him on camera like 8 years ago. And I wrote to him, asking him, saying, like, I'm planning on doing a book on these pistols. Can you help me get some context for what they came from? And his response was to tell me, you can't do a book on those. Nobody knows anything about those. Like, that's literally impossible. So
challenge accepted.
yes, I don't think he realized the volume that we had access to, and I think he was thinking in terms of documented archival records, which there are none. He's right, but I didn't let that stop me. But it would be fun to talk to him about the subject again with the book as a reference, and see if that jogs, you know, some more potential. But
Yeah.
very cool guy. He has actually written a book more recently on the Chinese army in what's often called the Second Sino-Japanese War. In China, it's called the Resistance War, or the War of Resistance. It's kind of like the difference between World War II and the Great Patriotic War in Russia. He's written a book, and the name, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but he wrote it in conjunction with a guy named Leland Ness, who is he's a Western Chinese arms enthusiast and scholar. And that is a really good book on the Chinese army organization and their weapons in particular. So there's good information on arsenals, and it basically doesn't talk about the pistols, because the pistols had very little like large scale impact on anything. They're officer sidearms. If you were really fortunate or wealthy, maybe, although wealthy people typically weren't in the warlord armies, these were being a professional soldier at this time in China was not looked on as a great social status thing. You know, in the United States, we really hold soldiers in high esteem. Look at how we treat veterans. Like, it's a very well respected thing to join the military and fight in for your country. Warlord era China, it was not. For them, being a soldier was basically, well, you're not good enough to do anything else, so I guess it's soldier or basic labor.
Yeah. Farming or something,
Maybe not even that.
Oh.
Like, you're the son that there wasn't really extra land for on the farm, so you went to the army. The phrase was like, bad iron makes bad nails. Like, the kind of people who become soldiers are not good material in the first place. So I don't know that there were a lot of wealthy people who ended up in that position, but these guns could have also been, oh, I'm a sergeant or something, and I'm not issued a pistol, but I'd like a self-defense sort of pocket weapon, and so I'll find a way to get myself one of these pistols. And beyond that, it's an officer's token of rank more than anything else.
Right.
Now, the Chinese armies at this period had an interesting use of the C96 Mauser and copies thereof that you don't see. I don't know if you guys can hear it. The dog is dreaming and sort of yip barking at some probably rabbit in her dream. Anyway, the Chinese armies used the broom-handle Mauser as sort of a pseudo submachine gun almost. They treated it like a close-range assault troops weapon, not like a handgun, but it was a repeating, especially if you think of the two common arms for the individual soldier would have been a Mauser rifle or a C96 Mauser. You got a lot more rapid firepower in a C96 than you do in a bolt action. And they had whole units, company-sized units that would be equipped with C96 pistols. In fact, it's interesting, in one section of Bin Shi's book, he has a TO&E, a table of equipment and organization equipment, for a particular Chinese division, and it lists out the weapons that the division had. And it has this many rifles, this many pistols, and this many Mauser pistols.
Oh.
And they separate the two. And it's, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 200 pistols and 1,200 Mauser pistols.
Wow.
So
would those have had shoulder stocks?
yes, yeah. And there are actually a lot of pictures from the era, especially once you get into the 1930s, of Chinese troops with C96 Mausers.
Wow.
And so that's also the reason a lot of the C96 Mauser copies are better quality than the copies of other smaller pistols, is because they were being used enough that it was more often effective, more often worthwhile to build a production line in an arsenal to make C96s. If you're making 50 FN 1900 copies, have the gunsmiths do it by hand. But okay, now we need 5,000 Mauser pistols. We'll set up the jigs and tooling, and they may not be a perfect copy, but that's the only way you're going to make them in enough volume.
Wow, I can't remember if that was in your book or not, that issue of the sort of mass issue of pistols to hold units to serve as sort of like submachine guns or small rifles or something. That's really interesting.
Yeah, they didn't have a lot of submachine guns. There are some. There are absolutely exceptions to that, but it feels to me like the C-96 served in the role that you would see submachine guns like in the Russian Army. Late World War II, the Russians have whole units of guys with Papashas and PPS-43s,
right?
Papashas mostly. The Chinese warlord equivalent to that was an entire company of men with C-96s.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. No one else did that. I think we have a telegram. All right, so let's get rid of the food because people are continuing to insist on dog.
And we want to pet the dog anyway.
Yeah, she's a nice one.
She's an adorable dog.
And then we do have one more cocktail. See, you could have gotten away with two, but when I gave you the option of which ones do you want to try, you couldn't decide, and so we ended up having to try both the aviation and the Maiden's blush. So.
Okay, somehow I'll manage.
Maybe. So now she's more interested in the food over there than she is in me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you rank right below pork.
Oh, yeah, you want to grab that?
Oh.
This will get her attention. Hey,
Dharma.
Dharma,
Oh, Dharma.
over here. This is not the person who brought you the pork.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, she will eat some Dongbei fried pork.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. You got it. A little farther. All right. There you go.
There.
One pup. Are you happy now? She's happy now. She got some pork and she's getting scritches. All right. I guess I'm not going to make a cocktail right off the bat because now I can't reach the table.
That's probably okay. We can wait a few more minutes.
Let's see. Holy cow. The comments went bonkers when she showed up. Now I can't catch anything. Wait, there went one. All right. What would you suggest if you were to get into the firearms collecting field for owning and use? Oh, that is way too broad of a question. If you want to get into gun collecting, collect guns that you find interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's what I did.
Yeah.
I found Japanese firearms really interesting because I was interested in the Pacific War more than any other war. When I was young and growing up in Virginia, I was really interested in the Civil War, American Civil War, because it was all everywhere, all around.
Yeah.
But like, it's not a really affordable collecting area, even way back then for a teenager. You know, so what I collected from the Civil War were bullets collected by farmers in rural Virginia, and every antique shop in Virginia used to have a big bowl filled with Civil War dug bullets, mini balls. Yep. And so I'd pick one up every time we went to a store, and they were cheap. But Japanese firearms were almost like that 30, 35 years ago when I started getting interested in them, and I could pick them up at an affordable price and they matched an interest. So that, if you're interested in it, that's the first step. And then, like, try not to be interested in the rarest guns in the world unless you happen to have a pretty good bank account.
Yeah.
But there's always something out there that you can find that's fascinating. And to me, one of the most fascinating parts is learning the history that's associated with these things. It's not just because it's a gun, it's because it's associated with historical events.
Yeah.
And it represents something about history and about technology and about international relations. You can relate it to anything. It's really a great hobby.
I always try to warn people away from collecting what other people think is collectible.
Right.
pick the thing you like and learn about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, when I was collecting Japanese firearms mostly, it's because they were cheap. So, in the end, it turns out, they did go up in value, but not for a long time because they were everywhere.
Right. John Keane at Morphe's and we did a thought experiment at one point of how many Japanese machine guns are in this country.
Oh man.
And we just some basic numbers based on how many American servicemen ended up in Japan during the occupation, as well as actually in combat in the Pacific theater, not Japan itself, but all of the rest of the fighting. And it was millions. And how many of them chose to bring back a rifle? Because souvenir Arasakas, where it was like, on your day off in occupation duty, head down to the arsenal and there's a mountain of rifles and just grab yourself a souvenir one. Kind of a standard thing.
I mean, I've talked to vets who said, on one day they would assemble the whole company or regiment or whatever, and they'd go to where the Japanese firearms had been collected, say in early occupied Japan or right after the war, and they were being taken there specifically so they could pick out their souvenir Arasaka to take home, and they all just grabbed whatever was there, and some of them got something really cool, and a lot of them got, an ordinary rifle, and that's what a lot of those were. They had never actually left the country.
Right.
But then the guys that were in the various islands were also collecting stuff, and it was not a big deal to bring it back.
Yeah. So there are, I don't think it's an overestimation to say there are millions of Arasakas in this country.
Oh, I would think so, yeah.
So, yeah, it takes a long time for those to achieve significant monetary value, especially more common variations.
I used to know a fellow who grew
We
up
have a telegram service on the side.
Yes. So, yeah, pardon our distraction. But I used to know a fellow who grew up in Hawaii, and he was 8 years old at the time of Pearl Harbor, living on the naval base because his father was in the Navy, and in fact he was present for the attack, and he saw a Japanese plane flew 50 feet away outside his window because he was on the second floor. But he lived there during the war, and the military was taking huge quantities of captured weapons and dumping them in Hawaii. And by the end of the war, he was old enough to kind of know something about these things, and he collected fantastic things like Japanese machine guns because they were all over the place, and he could get a hold of them. A very serendipitous way to start collecting. But I mean, he was in the thick of it in a sense because he was there for the event that started it. Not many people were there, in a sense.
Right.
I mean, there were a lot of people there, but how many 8-year-old boys were there and witnessed the attack and looked at the Japanese pilot in the eye?
Yeah.
Pretty interesting experience.
Indeed. So we're also being asked about potential future book projects. Now, I don't know how much we want to give away.
You decide that.
Yeah, I don't know. Let me make a drink first. Think about it.
Yeah, so that will loosen his lips and hopefully not sink any ships.
Let's see. Can I have the shaker? Yep. And do we have the glass in there? No. Whoops. The glass is coming. All right. So
some ice, right?
And yeah, we have a refill of ice, so we're good there. So our third one, which we have to do, is the Shanghai Cocktail. It's can't avoid that. So this came out of a nightclub called DD's Nightclub, and I think it was 1932 that their cocktail menu was printed. And it's a whole cocktail book, and it's got some really good stuff and some really bad looking recipes, and then a lot of stuff in the middle. And they're what they call a Shanghai cocktail is kind of like an old-fashioned without bitters. So it's a whiskey cocktail, which at the time,
Whiskey, yes.
Yeah.
Whiskey.
yeah. Now at the time that was typically Canadian whiskey, because Scotch was not a thing. Scotch was drunk by people in Scotland who were too poor to afford imported whiskey, and it was Scotch, especially peated Scotch, as a popular taste is a relatively recent thing. Certainly by standards of 1930. 1930s, we've got prohibition in the U.S. that had shut down U.S. production, so there wasn't bourbon. Canadian whiskey was one of the big sources. So,
Oh, interesting.
that all leads up to I don't have a Canadian whiskey. So,
After explaining how important it is.
yes, exactly. By the way, Canadian whiskey was often more rye, although not quite as much. Like a rye whiskey in the United States today has to be made with a majority rye in the mash bill, which means it's a very rye flavor. The Canadian whiskey is often a substantial amount of rye, but not a majority. It doesn't quite taste as spicy and distinctive as a rye. What I have is a bottle of Irish whiskey that I bought because the name was just too appropriate. Writer's Tears. What a perfect name for an Irish whiskey.
Which, for Ian tonight, are tears of joy
Yeah,
because of all
yeah.
you out there.
Yes, not tears of sadness here. So, this should be a relatively, I want to say mild without it being derogatory. Like, it's not peated, it's not spicy rye whiskey, it's just a really nice, smooth, even-tempered whiskey that should make a good base for a cocktail. So we've
Yeah,
got,
I mean, is there even a cocktail that would use peated scotch?
yes,
Really?
not a lot of them, but I have found some.
Because it sounds a little bit kind of like a sacrilege.
That's like advanced level mixology, coming up with something that will mix properly.
Yeah.
So I don't have the recipe anymore, but I went to a cocktail bar once that had an extensive Scotch whiskey cocktail menu. And they had one called the Western Isles that had Lafroig 10, which is like
super
drinking
peaty.
a briquette.
I
And,
love it.
and sherry and chartreuse.
Wow.
And it was fantastic. Out of 3 ingredients that have no business being anywhere near me. But man, I wish I remembered the recipe. But getting back to this guy, the recipe calls for 1 glass of whiskey, which has a meaning. This goes back to it. Technically, it is a pony glass. It's a measuring glass. It is effectively 2 ounces. A lot of classic Prohibition era cocktails are all essentially the same volume to fit in the same basic glassware. And so you're looking at basically 2 ounces of spirit. So this is whiskey with a couple dashes of modifiers. Specifically, the original recipe here calls for 2 dashes of grenadine, 1 lump of sugar, which we're going to take to be a dash of simple syrup, which is a 50-50 mix of sugar and water, and the juice of half a lemon. So that's literally what the recipe calls for. Dashes, glass, and half a lemon. There's like nothing objective measurable about this. However, I can tell you, the glass is a 2 ounce pour.
I'm really glad that this is not the glass he's using to
Yes.
measure the whiskey.
So I've got 2 ounces of whiskey. By the way, this is an OXO measuring cup that has a flat on the inside with
Oh, yeah.
1/4 ounce markings, and I love it. I have no interest in a traditional cocktail jigger because they're really imprecise and I don't like them. And this thing is perfect. So, but of course I'm doing exactly the opposite of that on this particular drink. So we've got our 2 ounces of whiskey, and then we want a lump of sugar or a dash of simple syrup. And I'm just going to pour basically a blob. That's 1/4 ounce, which is a little bit heavy for a dash. That's about a lump of sugar. And then grenadine. We want 2 dashes of grenadine. And we're making these kind of generous dashes to make up for a not trivial amount of lemon juice that goes into it. I suspect at the time, the lemons that were available, probably a bit smaller than the lemons we get today. All of our produce today has been selectively bred, if not genetically engineered, to be big. A lemon in 1930s Shanghai, a little more organic, a little more natural off the tree, probably not quite so big. So let me wade through the cocktail ingredients over here, which you guys can't really see, but we've got a crowded table here. just gonna juice that straight in there.
There's a lot of lemon juice.
Yes, it is. But we have got our grenadine and our simple syrup in there to balance it out. So this may be a little bit more on the tart side.
That's all right. I'm more of a tart than a sweet.
All right.
I'm
And my thought with this set of cocktails for the book was this is what was being drunk at the time, not modified to modern taste. Like, you want to know if you walked into DD's cocktail bar in 1932 and ordered a Shanghai cocktail, this is what you would have gotten. I scared the dog away. Sorry, pup. A little bit pinkish because of the grenadine. Our third of the evening. Cheers.
Oh my God.
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
It is whiskey heavy. You've got, it's a little on the lemon sour side, but not so much as to be unpleasant. What's interesting about it is it doesn't have, with a drink like this, we normally would expect bitters.
Right.
Angostura bitters. And, I mean, it sounds redundant, but a bitter flavor element to it. And you don't have that. And that's sort of, to me, that's what makes this a Shanghai cocktail and not just an old-fashioned from the 30s.
Right.
An old-fashioned would basically be this with bitters in it.
No.
At the time, the old-fashioned recipe has changed a lot over time, but you'd have like some muddled fruit, like an orange and cherry muddled, with a lump of sugar and a dash of Angostura bitters and whiskey. And
So is that, what's the difference between Manhattan and a generic whiskey sour? Is there a difference?
Manhattan has vermouth.
Oh, right.
Vermouth and no citrus.
Right.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
this is good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. I'll have to get in my time machine and go back to Shanghai in the 30s and try one in a proper environment.
It would be an interesting experience.
Yeah.
Half terrifying, half fascinating.
Right.
I can only imagine, just from the reading I've done, I can't imagine Shanghai in the 30s. An incredibly chaotic but cosmopolitan, like, it is film noir in a box.
Oh.
You've got gangsters, prostitutes, dancing girls, saloons all over the place, nightclubs, the armies running around. Like, you've got the Shanghai Municipal Police, you've got the French concession police, who are a different thing with slightly different rules. So there are organized criminal gangs that know the rules, the different rules, and they operate. They base in one side of the settlement, and they operate in the other, and then they run back across the concession border. Shanghai at its height was maybe 50,000 Europeans and I think over 1 million Chinese residents in the international settlement.
Wow.
When you get into the later 1930s, you have Chinese refugees flooding into the international settlement ahead of Japanese occupation armies. And you've got the Shanghai Municipal Police trying to not just enforce law in the city, but physically, like, defending the city and making sure the Japanese don't overrun the international settlements. They get the Shanghai, the Shanghai Volunteer Corps formed as sort of a militia to help defend the city. You got U.S. Marines, the cream of the crop of the U.S. Marine Corps in going into World War II. The guys who had combat experience were the China Marines, who'd been deployed to China, and they'd fought in China. Actually, you had that before World War I as well. You had the elements of the U.S. Marine Corps who went over and fought in the Boxer Rebellion. And those guys formed the hardcore of the Marines who trained up the rest of the expanded Marine Corps for World War I. But it's a fascinating place to think about.
I wonder if there are any classic movies from the 30s that depict Shanghai during that time in a way that would give you an interesting picture. I mean, I don't know.
There must be.
Maybe somebody out there knows and
Yeah,
post
that'd
it, because that would be fascinating to watch something like that and filmed then, whether or not it was actually in Shanghai, but if it was an accurate portrayal of the environment and the milieu of that city at that time, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. Just, yeah. Amazing, interesting place. We have a short section on Shanghai in the book. Because I actually have one of the Shanghai Municipal Police Colt 1908 pistols. And they made some specific modifications to them. And so we cover that. It's not a Chinese pistol, but it was a pistol that was specifically purchased for the Chinese officers in the Shanghai Municipal Police. It was a thoroughly international police force. Americans, Brits, Scots, Irish, not really French officers, because the French had their own section of the international settlement. But a lot of Russians, a lot of white Russian refugees from the Russian Civil War, a lot of Sikhs.
Wow.
From the British influence, a lot of Japanese. There were Japanese officers in the Shanghai Municipal Police, which got kind of awkward later on. And Americans over there is, yeah.
Wow, what a fascinating cultural mix that must have been.
We're getting close. We're down to 25 minutes left. Let's see. What are we at? To refresh this. We are at, whoa, 1.528, 1.529. That is awesome.
That's fantastic. Oh, wow, the numbers are just...
So the coolest thing about Kickstarter is if you leave the Kickstarter main page open, it will auto refresh, and it doesn't just change the number, it actually has that like cash register scrolling feature, and you can watch it go pzzz, which is
It is cool. I mean, while he said that, I think 3 new
pledges came
in, yeah. That's amazing.
Woo! Fantastic. Thank you all very much. All right, let's see. Hello, Greg Leninga, whose name I may have pronounced right or wrong. Thank you for joining us. Ooh, here we go. Here's an interesting one. 7Cog says, you said they used the C96 in an SMG-like role. In your research, did you come across any detachable magazine versions? Yes. So Mauser, this is the funny part here, is Mauser sold a crap load of C96s into China. Like, this is one of those things that a lot of people may not realize. Just like we were talking earlier today, the Winchester 95s, the majority of Winchester 1895 production was sold to Russia, military contract. Well, the majority of Mauser C96 production was sold into China. We're talking over 500,000 C96 pistols. An insane number if you try and wrap your head around it. Well, that's going to attract some attention. And in particular, it attracted attention from a couple of Spanish companies, Astra and Vestigui Hermanos, who both came up with guns that look pretty much exactly like C96 Mausers, but internally they work different. So they're not, technically speaking, they're not patent violations, although this is late 20s, 1930s, so patents on the C96 are long expired anyway. But they start selling, Astra in particular, sold small traditional style pistols. And their sales agents were like, these Chinese guys love the C96, we need something like that. And so, okay, Astra R&D comes up with the Astra 900, the Astra 900, which looks just like a C96. Sell it, great, they like it. You know what else they like? Lots of firepower. So then Astra comes up with a full auto version. And then Astra comes up with a full auto detachable magazine version. And they're selling a bunch of them. The only reason they slow down is basically governmental restrictions in Spain. There's some political upheaval in Spain, and the government decides to clamp down on arms production in Spain, which has the impact of, well, if we can't make them, we can't ship them to China. But in the meantime, Mauser's sitting there going like, wait, what? That's our thing. You can't. They made a full auto one. Crap. We need to make a full auto one. And that's when Mauser introduces the Schnellfeuer, their full auto version, which is detachable magazine. Like, full auto with a 10-round fixed mag is a little debatable utility. Bastigui, by the way, also makes a full auto mag-fed version, detachable mag-fed version. So they are there, but they're pretty darn late. So C96s have been going into China for a very long time. It's only in the 1930s that the full auto and the magazine-fed versions start showing up. And there are also Chinese copies made with detachable mags. I don't think we have any of the, well, we have a couple Chinese copies of the Astra, in fact, of a Select Fire Astra in the book. We don't have any Mauser Select Fire guns in the book. Some of the Chinese copies of other styles of pistol are Select Fire. Every once in a while, like, we have a bunch of guns in the book that have 2 safety levers, which actually are 2 redundant safety levers. But then there's a few where you look at it and the second lever is actually a selector lever. And it's generally not marked, because none of these things are marked, at least not in any way that you would recognize as a legitimate marking. But there are a couple of machine pistols in the book, and as a collector, that's something that you need to be cognizant of, because you ought to know, whether you choose to buy it or not, whatever its legal status is, it's incumbent upon you to understand what it is that you own. And the ones I looked at, generally the full auto ones, like the domestic full auto pistols, they didn't work anymore. Those parts were so worn that the gun may or may not fire at this point at all, much less full auto. But they were out there, they were done.
So I can't recall if you ever determined why some of these pistols had 2 redundant safeties,
No idea.
because that's unusual, I guess.
It is, it's very unusual. And typically the way that would work is you would have one like at the back of the slide behind the grip panel. So kind of like where you'd have it on a Colt 1903. And then the second safety would be basically where you would expect a magazine release button to be, on the front, in front of the grip panel. And then the magazine release would be a heel side.
Oh,
So
right.
I could see it being, frankly, I could see this being marketed today as, oh, well, it's multifunctional. You pick which style of safety you like. So, you know, if you like the one, you use this one and you leave the other one always on fire. Maybe. That's the only rational explanation I could come up with. You could always suggest that someone wanted it double secret safety probation. Or if one's good, two's better, or various reasons that don't really stand up to logical analysis.
Because is it correct, there are no other sort of traditional standard pistols that have multiple safety?
Not multiple thumb safeties. There's lots of stuff out there like a 1911.
Right,
Thumb safety, grip safety.
right.
Grip safeties are basically unknown on the Chinese pistols. I don't think we found any. The guns they were copying didn't. Well, I shouldn't say none. There are a couple 1911 copies in the book, and those have grip safeties. The more common stuff, the 32 and 30 Mauser caliber stuff, they didn't copy anything with grip safeties really. They didn't make their own. But yeah, there are no European pistols with 2 distinct thumb safeties.
So that's a fascinating question that may have to go unanswered.
Yeah.
Unless somebody turns up something, you never know.
Yeah.
Or somebody can intuit why this would be.
Yeah. It'd be fascinating to know, like, is there a specific set of characteristics? Did those double safety pistols all come from a particular time period or a particular province? Where maybe there was some, you know, we've got stupid gun features that exist for legislative reasons. Maybe there's some province where the governor went, I'm concerned about safety, so you have to have 2 redundant safeties on any pistol. But
Anything is possible.
This is all-
isn't it?
totally speculative.
Right.
So,
But yet another thing that makes these interesting, if you're collecting stuff, things that are interesting are more fun to collect.
I do want to point out, we identified the guns in the book that are machine pistols, or theoretically machine pistols, and we identify the ones that have 2 safeties, because I think there is, I want to quell any potential suspicion that like that's a machine pistol, but they say it's got 2 safeties to avoid any legal issue. No, if we say it has 2 safeties in the book, it's legitimately 2 safeties, because we looked at all those things and we're like, 2 safeties, please, that's a selector switch. But no, in fact, the gun doesn't fire unless they're both in the fire position.
Wow.
15 minutes. We're closing in.
Yeah.
The end is nigh.
What can we get to in 15 minutes?
I bet we can do 1.55. Think we can do 155? We are now at,
The number, I mean, I'm seeing some scrolling there.
we're at 153. That's a lot of orders in 14 minutes. But it might be possible.
Because it's your literal last chance to get the purple cover with the interesting Easter eggs all over it.
You know,
It's very cool.
I am curious. Oh, my computer locked up. I'm curious if we still have any of the collector edition books.
Oh, yeah.
Because we went through the purple collector editions very quickly. Those sold out I think it was less than a week. And then the standard cover collectors sold out, but took a little bit longer. And then we had the bundles of both. So I stand corrected, we're at 1534.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is feasible. And as of the beginning of this live stream, I think we had 28 of the double collector packages left. And
So drum roll.
we still have 27 of them.
Oh,
So they're out there. If you want a purple collector edition, that double bundle is the way to get it. So if you can find someone who wants the gray version, or if you just end up having both, that's the way to get those. Whatever is left, so if we have double collector edition bundles unsold 13 minutes from now, we will list the gray collector editions on the website. Because that's not a Kickstarter exclusive, that'll go on the website. I don't know exactly what we'll do with the purple ones yet. They will not be available for immediate sale, I don't think. What we'll probably do is hold them for the next Kickstarter. And we'll have, however many are left, we'll have a bundle option for that book, a purple collector China, with a collector edition of whatever the next Kickstarter launch is.
that's a long time to wait, though. If you really want
It
it.
is, you should really just get it now.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I'm biased or anything.
Don't wake up in the morning and have regrets.
So, I don't really want to, see the problem is, I know what book I'm going to do next, but I haven't talked to Nick and James about whether we want to publicize that yet.
Right.
We will be doing Max's book. Max's book actually will come before the next thing I do. So this book came about on pretty short notice because we got access to this collection of pistols and figured, well, we kind of know there's not a lot of documentation out there. So we can do this book kind of on short notice. This kind of turned into a pandemic project of a book. The next one I'm going to write is going to require a lot more in-depth research. And it'll be a book much more like Thornycroft or Chassepoe. That is, it's a collector's guide, it's a heavy-duty reference book, where China, the Chinese pistol book it's not a coffee table book, but it's more heavily focused on the photography and the cataloging of the guns. So it's going to take me a couple of years to do my next book. Max's, the next thing that we print that is currently publicized will be Max's book. We do have hopes for one for a winter launch this year, which we should be, like once we finalize the agreement with the authors, it's a book, it's a third-party book, like Thornycroft. to SAE.
Mhm.
Once we finalize that agreement, then we can publicize that on the website, and we will, and we're excited about it. I do also have plans that are still in the works to do a book on silencers with Kevin Brittingham, but I don't have a schedule for that yet. So that's a collaborative work. I'm depending on Kevin for a lot of the subject matter expertise on that, because he's been collecting, and we did a photo shoot with his silencer collection. Just like racks. He's got
Wow.
a pile of original Maxim silencers. They're so cool. And he collects Maxim documentation and advertising literature.
Ooh.
We've got a ton. It's so cool. It's remarkable that nobody's done a reference work, really any sort, on Maxim, the original silencers. So that we have up on the website.
That'll be cool.
But no specific date on that one yet, because I just don't know. It depends on both of our work schedules. And I'm fairly busy, and he's like running a real company, so he's also busy. I really like that. That Shanghai Cocktail, I would call that a legit period taste. Because I don't think you're going to get that in a cocktail bar today.
No, it's actually pretty subtle.
Yeah. Very
Which
much
I like.
depending on the whiskey.
Yeah.
Different
yeah.
whiskeys are definitely going to taste different, which isn't always the case. You get a heavy modifying flavors. What's the... Oh, we have an incoming telegram, but it'll be just a moment. Nope, it's been rejected, thrown out. Sorry, whatever that was.
So what would the difference be if you had a 30s period Canadian whiskey? What difference would this make, if any, that you could even tell?
I don't think it would be that different, unless there was something really distinctive about the particular Canadian whiskey you had. I picked that partly because I had it, but because it's a fairly moderate, middle of the road, not, it's not super peaty, it's not super spicy, it's not super high proof. I think it's 40, yeah, it's a straight 40%. It's not the world's best whiskey. It is a really good name, which was enough to convince me to buy it originally.
Oh, yeah, that's fantastic.
But I think that's pretty typical. Whiskey quality in the 30s was not what it is today. Like so many things, frankly, like guns. You go spend $400 on a generic, off-the-rack hunting rifle today, and it's going to be more accurate than a sniper rifle from World War II. And frankly, our distillation is better too. That writer's tears, as sort of totally nice, mid-range, not special, not super expensive whiskey, is going to be better than most of the stuff that you would have gotten in Shanghai in the 30s, I suspect.
Well, it's kind of a captive audience there, so whatever they could get.
Arasaka Type 38 on Type 99 furniture. Did they ever do that?
38 on 99 furniture.
I'm thinking no.
Not that I'm aware of.
That sounds like a put together.
I mean, there are, well, it's not, I wouldn't call it furniture, but, I have seen one early prototype experimental gun that was a 38 that had some features added to it because it was in a caliber that was roughly a 7.7 caliber that apparently they were developing. It wasn't the 7.7, but they added features to a 38 rifle like a recoil bolt because it needed that with a stronger cartridge, but otherwise it looks like a 38. So I don't know.
You find that in a pawn shop 99% of the time. It's someone's, I bought this barrel action and I thought it'd be easy to get a stock, but I couldn't find a stock. So I found a 38 trainer and I took the stock from that and I made it work. That's probably what that
I did see once a very weird Arasaka. I have no idea if it was real. It was a combination maybe of some 99 features, but it had a Type 44 folding bayonet on it. I mean, it was a really weird mutant gun. If it was made in a garage or a gunsmith gunsmith's business, it was very well done, but it was just too weird to believe that it was a real thing that came out of Japan.
I have seen at least one of those that was a real thing that came out of China.
Oh,
One of the,
yeah.
there were arsenals, especially up in Manchuria, the Mukdan Arsenal, as it's referred to in Japanese collecting circles. It got controlled by, it was controlled by Chinese warlords at periods, and they made Arisakas from time to time.
Mm.
And there was, like, there are some really interesting Chinese rifles with things like Type 44 style bayonets. Now there are also fantasy Japanese rifles.
Right.
The one I've seen that I honestly I think would be a lot of fun to own is a Type 99 carbine. People will take a 99, cut it down to Type 38 carbine length, and then give it a monopod that's about that long, that's cut down to match. And I've seen some that are really well done. That'd be fun, but the last one I saw, the guy wanted like $1,000 for it, even knowing that it was a fake rifle. I'm like, no, that's like a $300 fake rifle price.
Sounds like it would not be that comfortable to shoot, though.
Ooh, 3 minutes to go, and
Oh my gosh.
I am being asked about John Wick. So, did I tell you about this? Do you remember this? A while
I
back,
remember now.
I mentioned that it would be a lot of fun to have a cameo in a John Wick movie. I don't know if you're old. Did you see John Wick?
Maybe, but I don't know that I did because I don't remember who he is.
It's a comic book based movie about basically a fantasy world that has this subculture of professional assassins.
Yeah,
They've
I
got their
probably didn't
own
see that.
They've got their own culture and rules and society and thing. And they have a gun sommelier. And John Wick, who's played by Keanu Reeves,
Oh,
needs weapons for a mission, and so he goes into the sommelier and places this very froofy wine-sounding order. And it's so much fun. I'm like, I'd love, that would be so cool. Just, don't even make me the sommelier, just a cameo or I walk through the back of the suit or something. And someone actually started a change.org petition for them to put me in a John Wick movie.
oh my
And they
gosh.
got like 100,000 signatures.
What?
It's just totally bonkers.
Actually, that's not surprising.
Well, unfortunately, nothing ever came of it.
Oh.
I did actually reach out behind the scenes through a couple ways that I was hoping I could get in contact. Nothing ever came of it. So I think those movies are now in post-production.
Oh.
So I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen. But to
That
be
would
honest,
have been cool.
it would have been so cool. That was such a long shot to begin with. Okay, we need to look at where we are now.
Oh, yeah.
We are,
Let's see where you end up. As
let me refresh the page. It says 2 minutes to go. We're at 15:38.
Ooh,
We could do that. Like, that could actually happen. 15:05.
this is the time when all of you folks who are eBay purchasers and push the button in the last 3 seconds. It's time to push the button.
Just about. The page actually now tells 100 seconds to go.
Ooh.
And is now actually counting down second by second. 90 seconds to go.
There's
There's a couple. You guys are pretty cool.
Yeah, there's.
Pretty cool. Yep, there's another one.
Oh, awesome. Oh, man.
And 39
Ooh.
with 76 seconds to go.
Push the button, push the button.
Oh. Okay, you know what we need at the very end here?
What?
We need that Lagavulin 16.
Oh, yeah.
Could you grab us a Lagavulin 16 and a pair of little tasting glasses?
Yeah. Now we're gonna do whiskey.
Oh my god, it's in red now. It's 50 seconds and now it's red.
50 seconds. Oh my gosh.
But it looks like we're gonna hit maybe 1540.
Yeah.
Alright. Would you do the honors, sir?
You bet.
So, there had to be some scotch somewhere. And
Yes.
Dad and I both have the same favorite scotch. And I don't think we're alone in this. It is Lagavulin 16.
It's fantastic.
Which I would love to figure out some way. You know, it would be as fun right up there with getting in a John Wick movie would be getting Lagavulin to sponsor it.
Oh, yeah.
Probably ain't gonna happen, but
Oh, come on.
7 seconds.
Come
We are
on, just a couple
just
more.
one order away
one
from
more.
1540. And last time, like, it took a minute to finish.
Yes.
Boom, 1540.
Woo!
Cheers.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you guys.
Thanks to everybody, boy.
Mm. Oh my goodness, that is amazing whiskey.
That is.
So, final tally 1.54. Oh, no, they just bumped.
Hmm?
They're still tallying numbers.
What?
Yeah, it's at $1,540,659.09.
Wow.
And I have no idea where the 9 cents came from.
Yeah.
Someone put in a little custom pledge with some pennies on it. I saw people do that last time. There were a couple that were like $5.56, 8.57, that kind of thing.
That's because they had their eBay brain on.
$7. Well, no, they're
And-
looking for gun numbers. Like, I'm gonna pledge $7.62.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
So that may be where that came from. But it looks like that has now actually stopped, just like Chasseau. Like for a minute afterwards, it
Wow.
caught up. But 1.54, that is just mind-boggling. So that
Yeah.
is more than Thornycroft and Chasseau put together.
And I've seen it, and you will not be disappointed. It is a fantastic book.
I get him boozed up, so he'll say that. No, I'm really
Yeah.
excited about the book. I really like how it turned out. So we're still working on the editing. It's coming closer to fruition. We tried to have this book a little farther along in the process than the previous ones before we did the Kickstarter, because we want to get this one out in your hands a little faster than last time. And I think that'll happen. There's still a couple rounds of edits left to do, but we're getting close now. So
It's worth the wait.
2 hours. This was worth the wait too.
Yes.
I like the cocktails, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's hard to beat a really good scotch, and this is.
You think he looks like a wizard? Whatever man it is at Lagavulin who is the master distiller, or woman, I don't know.
Right.
There are female master distillers who are
Yeah.
damn good. But whoever it is at Lagavulin is a legit wizard. Well, I'm sure it earns their keep. All right. I think, shall we call it a night?
I think so. This has been fun.
Yes, it has.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
We did it again.
Thank you so much for people out there.
All right, guys. We have the this ghost behind the camera who's going to take the